Woodside, we have our last session or panel on global energy perspective. We indeed have a mixture of panelists from different countries. Let me introduce the moderator, Ashok Belani. Ashok is a Stanford alum, is a veteran in the energy space, starting his career in Schlumberger, and really starting from right at the beginning all the way to the very high in the leadership position. Several years ago, he started the Schlumberger New Energy, serving as executive vice president to really now investing in new energy, try to enable energy transition. Early this year, Ashok, I call it retire from Schlumberger, but it's never a retirement. He's indeed doing a lot, including advising me at the Preco Institute for Energy. With that, let me invite Ashok and the rest of the panel to come to the stage.
So, good afternoon. We finally come to the last panel of the conference. You know, normally in all the oil and gas conferences that I've been to, by the time we get the last panel, the place is all empty. There's hardly anyone there. So obviously there's more interest in these subjects. And as Yi told me when he put this panel last, he says it's the last, but it's the most important. People really want to listen to what the people here have to say. Now, interestingly, we've been talking about the energy transition, sustainability. We've talked about and the geopolitical aspects or the economic aspects, and a lot of science and a lot of technology and everything. And all through the discussion, I think one thing has been right front and center, that when you talk about energy, energy is so fundamental that there is no conclusions or anything you can say about energy unless you can provide scale to whatever solution you're talking about. So scale is extremely important. And we talk about scale, we've been discussing here mostly from the perspective of the American thinking or how we think in the West. So we created this panel so that we actually listen not only to the Western thinking, but to people from the rest of the world. And in this case, we are very fortunate to have 4 very eminent people who are coming. By the way, this panel has traveled the most amongst all the panels to actually be here, so we are very thankful to all these guys who are here with me. So we have Shaun Gregory from Woodside from Australia, the largest oil and gas company which is making a pivot to new energy, and Shaun is the Executive Vice President of New Energy at Woodside. Then we have Mr. Tripathi, who is a board member of a company called Greenko in India, and Greenko Energy is working on renewable electrons, 24/7 electrons from renewable, and also in renewable molecules, and he will tell us about it. And then we have David Long. David comes from BGE Water Solutions, so a sustainability company, the largest water treatment company in China, and we'll hear some interesting things from him. And then we have, last but not least, Eric Luo. Eric comes from LONGi, and LONGi is the world's largest solar panel manufacturer. 1 out of every 5 panels in the world comes from LONGi, and 2 wafers out of every 5 come from LONGi. So it's obviously very knowledgeable about how the world of renewables function. So the way we're going to conduct the panel is we will actually, all the people here are coming from different parts of the world, so they will give us a perspective of what the vision of their company is and what sector they are in and what its geographical dynamics is in that sector, and also give us an idea of what is happening in the country where they come from, since they are very knowledgeable about the dynamics of new energy in those countries. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Shaun to start.
Thanks, Ashok, and thanks for having me. So just firstly, to answer your question, so Woodside's been around sort of 65 years. We kind of grew up in the energy sector, liquefying natural gas. and exporting it from Australia to North Asia, mostly Japan originally, and into Greater Asia. And so we've been exporting LNG at scale for 35 years, and I think we'll get to talk about the scale challenge here in new energy. But actually for the last 8 years, I've been leading technology at Woodside, and so we had a theme in technology around what is this thing called the energy transition. And so we incubated that concept actually inside technology, where it could be kind of protected from the base business and kind of avoid the valley of death. And essentially the two businesses that kind of incubated there were carbon solutions and hydrogen. And they kind of spawned out to create the new energy division at the middle of this year. And so one of the things of being successful in incubating a business, they then said, well, go and lead it now and bring it to scale. And so that's what we're doing now. And essentially answering the call to our traditional LNG customer base, they say, we want zero carbon fuels in the future. How can you help us? Japan, Korea, Singapore, they've all got net zero aspirations. And we export LNG to them, and they are looking to us for the solution to that net zero. And that's how we all get to scale, is solving country scale problems when they're net zero. So then a brief perspective on Australia. We're kind of blessed as a resource country with a low population base. So a lot of stuff that we have in our country gets exported to the world, whether it be iron ore, methane as LNG, and in the future it'll be sunlight and wind. So we'll convert that sunlight and wind into a fuel and export it to the world. And we've got the land and the sunlight and the wind resources at scale in order to be able to satisfy country scale ambitions. And that is the ambition of Australia. And they're just getting in place the regulatory environment to allow that to happen. So that's Woodside and Australia.
All right, thank you. Mr. Tripathi?
Yeah, thank you, Ashok. Well, this energy transition, before I come and talk about Greenko, the company I represent, let me give you the national perspective. For India, this energy transition is seen two ways. One is to decarbonize the economy, but also to look at the energy security. Especially in the context of India, when the economic growth over 7% is expected to be there for the next 2 decades, how do you meet the energy requirement is a big challenge for the country. And that's how, unfortunately, we are not bestowed with that kind of oil and gas resources in the country, which is importing almost 85% of its oil needs. The country is badly affected in terms of this energy disbalance in its domestic and imports. So country looks at renewable energy as an opportunity to provide energy security to the country. Fortunately, we have one of the best potential of sun and the wind together. And the other very distinguished factor for India is it has one of the lowest national electricity grid, which is connecting country across east to west and north to south. And at half of the cent price, you are in a position to transport the green electron from west to east. So that's the typical feature. Riding on that, the country wants to see this as an opportunity to provide energy security. And that's how the government has made huge plan in terms of creating additional renewable energy capacity, which was initially targeted to 175 gigawatt, which recently has been upgraded to a 500 gigawatt capacity by 2030. And that's the big target the government has given, which is the kind of a framework on which all the industries around, both largely led by the private sector, is working on this. Apart from that, the government has also given a hydrogen mission where they are aiming at 5 million tons of hydrogen, green hydrogen production by 2030. So that's the scale on which the country is working. Now, government has done a lot of initiative in terms of providing that enabling environment. One of the best things what government has done is to create demand. And there is where the large tenders, procurement tenders have been announced by the government for round-the-clock green power. So it's no more just simple solar and wind power. They are talking about 24/7 green electron, how you can provide to the industry. So those large tenders are already in the market, which is creating a lot of surge and demand in the country. Apart from that, there's almost a $5 billion PLI scheme, production link incentive scheme government has announced, which is supporting creation of solar panel, manufacturing of solar panel, and batteries. This is for these two sectors, and beyond that, the PLI for the electrolyzer sector is likely to be announced by the government shortly. In addition to that, they are also coming out with the mandatory storage obligations, and which is going to create huge capacity for the players to create large storage. So that's where the framework which has been set up by the government for the country. And under this vision, different industries in the country are working to see how this energy transition can be leveraged and how they can collectively provide the energy solution to the country, energy security, as well as decarbonize the economy. Coming to Greenko, Greenko is just 1 decade story. It's a small company started with its first 5 megawatt solar and hydro generation capacity, and today it is 7.5 gigawatt operating capacity of renewable power. It's a combination of both solar, wind, and hydro together. Another 7 gigawatt are under construction, different phases, which should be commissioned in the next 2 years' time. So that's the scale the company has reached in the last 10 years. Now, the next transition the company wants to make is to create one of the largest storage and the green molecule platform, which is the next direction, next 1 decade company has set up the target. And today, as we speak, they are constructing one of the largest solar pump hydro storage plant in the world globally. It is going to have 10 gigawatt hour storage capacity. And the target is by 2026, we'll have 50 gigawatt hours of storage capacity. And going forward by 2030, it'll be having 100 gigawatt hour storage capacity. And the first project, which is right now under construction, should be operational by September next year. And then every year, they're going to add, and each, they call it integrated renewable energy project, which is basically co-locating the solar and wind, and along with the hydro pump storage project, and which is going to be one project together. Like that, there are 10 projects the company is looking at it, which will create a capacity of almost 100 gigawatt hour by 2030. The next phase is how to convert this green electron into green molecules. The company is setting up a target of 3 million tons of ammonia production by 2026, and going forward to 10 million tons ammonia capacity 10 years down the lines. That's the scale on which the company is working today. Now, having its own storage capacity, providing round-the-clock green power, the missing link was the electrolyzers. And there is where they have signed up a joint venture agreement with one of the leading electrolyzer player out of Belgium, John Cochrane, and they are going to set up a gigawatt-scale electrolyzer manufacturing capacity in India. It'll have almost 2 gigawatt capacity. And this plant, which is under construction now, will be fully booked for next 6-7 years to support this kind of hydrogen production, the green route. So this is the scale, and the cost at which these storage services are likely to be provided is somewhere in the range of 4.5 to 5 cents per unit of power, per kilowatt hour. So that's the scale on which the Greenko is right now working. And it is expected that by 2030, this will be one of the largest storage platform with 100 gigawatt hour capacity and 3 million tons of green ammonia, which will not only meet the domestic requirement, but also looking for the export market.
Thank you. This is, I think the purpose of the discussion today on this panel was to leave you with an idea that there are real companies, real projects, large-size projects that are actually happening in the part of the world where more than half the population of the world lives. So it's not only the plans that we make here, but there is a lot of aggressive thinking that is going on the other side of the planet. So with that, we go to another aspect of sustainability that hasn't been talked about a lot in the meeting. So it's really, we are fortunate to have David Long here, who represents BGE Water Solutions. David, your floor.
Okay. Thanks for the invitation. to be here in Stanford. I am David Long from BG China. BG was a company that's not just a new energy production company, but also environmental protection company. We combine the environmental protection and the new energy production together. So we are founded in 1992, that's 30 years ago. And I think we are one of the oldest environmental protection company in China, because 30 years ago, like in 1990s, we did not have any opinion of environmental protection that far away in China. And we got the IPO successfully in 2014, and we became to be a public company 8 years ago. Now we focused on both the environmental protection and also the new energy production, such as the domestic waste incineration for power, for electricity. That's garbage burning for electricity. And such as the hazardous waste disposal for metal recycling. Also that kind of the battery recycling for metal recycling, yeah, like that. Such as the production of new battery materials. In the past 10 years, I think we have invested almost 10 billion RMB on the waste to energy projects, and we have built more than 20 waste incineration power plants for electricity. I think every day we can dispose almost 12,000 tons of garbage, of domestic waste, and we can generate electricity more than 2 million kilowatt hours every day. And I think there are almost 1,000 waste incineration power plants in China, and the 70% of the waste, the domestic waste, is disposed by incineration for power. That's interesting because 10 years ago, that ratio is 30%. I mean, we learned from America to build a lot of landfills, and like 30 years ago. But after 2010, the government began to encourage and push in the waste to energy project. So we suddenly shut down any more construction of landfills. We switched to dispose the waste for incineration for electricity. In the field of the hazardous waste disposal, something like the battery recycling. Because, let me explain, because in China, we treat the used battery as hazardous waste. That's kind of dangerous waste. Yeah, so we treat it very strictly. We have the capacity of, I think we have the capacity to dispose almost 1 million tons of hazardous waste every year. And we can produce like more than 100 million tons of recycled corpus every year. As we know that each ton of recycled copper can effectively reduce 3.5 tons of carbon emission. So that's very useful for the carbon reduction. So we still doing the battery recycling like that. I think in the next 10 years, the main growth points for BG will be the resource recycling, because it connects the environmental protection and the new energy production and the carbon reduction perfectly. They connect them together. Yeah.
Do you think your water solutions are going to be critical for for instance, for hydrogen and these kind of new businesses that are or batteries and so on as well?
No, I don't think so. We have not go that far. Yeah, we don't produce any batteries. We only do the battery recycling. Yeah, for the last several years. So it's kind of hard to produce a battery. Yeah, because we are not that kind of company here.
Yeah.
We were an environmental protection company. Yeah, not an energy company. Yeah, so that's. I don't think we will go that far, maybe, but just we will produce the materials, the battery materials. Yeah.
It's very impressive, David, what you have achieved since 1992 at scale on such a fundamental activity.
Yeah, thanks.
So let me move on to Eric. Eric, certainly the largest company on the panel here, 20% of the world's solar panel market share. Eric, tell us a little bit about how it works.
Thank you, Ashok. So I'm here not just because we are the platinum sponsor. So LONGi, on top of the largest solar company, actually we are also the Fortune Future 50 2022. We are listed number 42nd. So we are also the part of the renewable energy 100% organization as of today. We have 32 manufacturing plants in China and Southeast Asia. We have achieved 40%, 100% renewable. Our commitment is by 2028, we are going to be 100% renewable for all our manufacturing. So under IRA, we are also actively evaluate the manufacturing possibility in the US and to support and to help US to build a sustainable solar supply chain. So in a carbon neutral or zero emission award, and LONGi's vision for energy transformation rests in 3 tracks. The first track we called solar PV, wind energy, or other energy as a primary source energy, which LONGi is actively engaged. Right? By this year, the global will install 300 gigawatt solar panel, 300 gigawatt solar panel. LONGi will have 20%, about 60 gigawatt. And the most important, 2 of every 5 panels use LONGi monocrystalline silicon wafer. And that's our first track we call primary source. The second track for the energy transformation LONGi believe is the intelligent grid and long duration storage, and also the intelligent grid operators. So that's the area a lot of people is talking about that. Then the third track we believe is going to be green hydrogen. So LONGi is also actively involved in the green hydrogen the business as a secondary energy source. We announced we are working with Sinopec, the largest gasoline station in China, to produce 20,000 metric tons of hydrogen powered by 300 megawatts PV panel. And every year we are going to reduce like 485,000 metric tons of polysilicon. So that's our vision and mission for carbon-free or net zero. As a primary source is PV and wind and other energies. Secondary source is hydrogen, and in between, we believe there should be intelligent grid operator or long duration storage, and that's our vision today.
Excellent. I don't know about you, but I think we have 4 very real, very large-scale companies who have projects that are progressing very rapidly and all happening in Asia, but for a global application. So taking from this, what I wanted to do was to ask, not a question, but ask everyone to comment on, there's this popular notion that all the activity in new energy or decarbonization is happening in the United States or in Europe or something. And however, all these kind of companies don't exist actually in the United States and Europe. So I wanted to ask a question, or let's say everyone to comment on, what is the pace of change that you see in this area? And to take away this myth that Asia is behind or is not active on this subject of decarbonization. And in fact, the impetus to move to new forms of energy in Asia is actually maybe larger than it is in the United States or in Europe, judging by the way things are going. And if you could weave into that a notion of all these recent problems that are happening on supply chain and the recession and so on, how they might affect the near to short-term direction of your companies. Maybe Shaun, you would like to take that first?
Yeah, okay. Let's tackle the supply chain problem first that we're seeing, and also the pace of change that we've seen. But really what I worry most about is the pace of change that's coming. This exponential curve of change that when it's going to hit. And the example I'll give is Japan is looking to decarbonise their coal-fired power stations. There's still a lot of coal in use, and they want to get it out of the system. And so they're looking to blend ammonia into a coal boiler. And generally there are 4 coal boilers on a coal-fired power station, and they're trying to do 20% blend of ammonia into one of those boilers. That's 500,000 tonnes of ammonia a year. Now, a world-scale ammonia plant is 1 million tonnes a year. So if you did all 4 boilers, 20%, that's 2 million tonnes, so twice the size of a large-scale ammonia plant per coal-fired power station at 20%. And it's pretty easy to get it to 50%. And so you can see this mountain that's coming, and that's one coal-fired power station, and this exponential curve that's coming, and it will come really quickly. And how do we supply all of that? So now let's flip to the other end, and that is at one of our leading ammonia hydrogen facilities, as a thing called H2 Perth. It's 3 gigawatts to the electrolyzers at full scale. 3 gigawatts. I just put an order in for 200 megawatts of electrolyzers. That was the biggest order for that company in the world. It's 8 months of production capacity. If I took that same production capacity and said, oh, okay, I'm going to put that on the H2 Perth 3 gigawatts, that's 10 years of production capacity. But I need that built in 4. And here's the supply chain problem, right? And that's a fully automated, fully robotic manufacturing facility. And you're going to take 10 years? No, we have to fix that supply chain in order to be able to deliver just 3 gigawatts, let alone what's going to be needed to kind of change all those coal-fired power stations. And so the supply chain problem is totally underestimated today, and why other companies are looking to just do it all themselves and bring it in-house at massive scale. And so, I'm excited about the pace of change that we've achieved to date. The opportunity on this exponential curve is massive, but the supply chain needs to be solved.
That's very well said. I think we have a project tsunami that's coming in Arun's language, right? Mr. Tripathi?
In terms of scale, when you talked about, I'll just give you some numbers. If you look at in the context of India, I'm giving the number, the installed capacity is almost 400 gigawatts, out of which renewable today is just 30-35%. Going forward, India's energy requirements are going to just double by 2030. Means India needs to have a 800 gigawatt installed capacity to meet that demand. So this new addition of 400 gigawatt is all going to come from the renewable energy. That's one. No new thermal power plants have been announced, barring few which are in the pipeline, which are half constructed. Otherwise, if you look at the data, these two sector, the renewable energy projects have grown at a rate of almost 10% CAGR, whereas thermal is just 2%. And going forward, it's going to be all renewable energy projects. So that's the scale the country is trying to talk about creating another 350 gigawatt in next 7 to 8 years. So that's the scale. Now, to support that, as you mentioned, the supply chain part, and that's where the government is providing that PLI scheme, production link incentive, and large capacities are being built for solar panel manufacturing, as well as batteries, and now in terms of electrolyzers. And that's where what the enabling role the government is doing is to create that demand and capacity. There is a bit difference in approach how the OECD countries and a developing economy like India and elsewhere are approaching to this issue. Because if you see in European context, it's a huge carbon credit market, which is supporting the investment in terms of people to decarbonize. If you look at a big economy like US, there's a huge subsidy budget which is being announced by the government. But this kind of liberty is not available with the developing economy. So what kind of innovation they're doing? They're trying to create a scale wherein cutting down the cost, creating demands, and creating the local supply chain. And that's the way that the approach is different, and that's the direction where India is working. When I talked about the solar pump hydro storage project is concerned, this is by far one of the largest storage projects being executed in the world today, where 10 gigawatt hour capacity will be available at just less than 5 cents per unit of power. So that's the scale which is helping us to cut down the cost, and of course, the cost of execution of project is compared to developed economies is cheaper there. So we are able to transform them, and that's similarly that story goes into further into ammonia projects, where we are talking of 3 million ton capacity, as I said, by 2026. The first green electrons should be available to the market, domestic and export market, by early 2025. That's the speed of execution we are talking about. And the rest of the supply chain all are available in India. There should not be any problem. The only issue was the solar panel and the electrolyzer. They are the two missing links on which the whole industry is working today.
I think you have to make friends with Eric
Yes.
here.
Okay.
David, your turn.
Yeah. In China, everything changed very quickly. Yeah, I have a very strong opinion, because I went back to China to have a work in BGE, and 12 years ago from Berkeley. No one knows what's the carbon neutralization or carbon peak or net zero goal. But now, if you ask any person, any people in China, I think everyone knows what's the carbon neutralization in 2060. Yeah, it seems that in the last several years, because of the encouragement of the government, the carbon trading and the carbon neutralization is not just a simple business in China, but also became a long-term career that's related to everyone in China. I think everyone thinks about that because the government says that we have to achieve the goal in 2060. So that's we changed a lot. And for example, BGE, like 10 years ago, when I got a job in BGE, we still do our main business to build the landfills. We learn from America, because America now is dispose the domestic waste mainly by landfilling, because of its easy operation and the mass manipulation. So we learned from America to build a lot of landfills. But 10 years ago, suddenly we found that we have any more projects for landfilling, because the government, they prohibited any more construction of landfills. It happens suddenly. So we switched to to investment of the incineration power plants. So that's a ratio for the domestic waste disposal, for incineration to electricity rise from 30% to 70% in the past 10 years. That happens a lot, because in the past 10 years, I think it's almost the same, staying the same in America. It did not change a lot. But in China, it's totally different. Yeah. And for another example, for the last 3 years, there are so many companies that started up to do some resource recycling or battery recycling. It's so competitive now in China. Although we don't have so many years for the e-mobile, e-vehicles, but the recycling companies are so competitive in China already. So for BGE, we are now a big platform, like kind of platform to multiply or to recycle multiple metals, such as nickel, copper, zinc, tin, and a variety of other precious metals. So we are trying to do that very hard. So if we don't do it quickly, we will die out very quickly. Yeah, so that's it.
Well, we certainly need a BGE subsidiary in the US very quickly. You know?
Oh, okay, thank you.
Eric, your turn.
So I will speak from the general industry perspective, not LONGi specific. Right? I don't remember who said in this forum, the US has lost exactly 12 years, a decade of the solar manufacturing. So I started my solar job exactly 12 years ago with Suntech, when the secretary is Stephen Chu being to our Suntech factory. So if you look at the solar development for the last 12 years, what has happened? Okay, the general trend is carbon neutrality is not going away. Okay, regardless of the challenge we are facing, every year you have 20 to 30% annual growth of solar installation, right? Then China is dominated, and we believe it will continue to dominate the solar manufacturing. I will give you the reasons. We estimate by 2030, global solar installation will be over 1,000 gigawatts. Today is 300. Okay. 80 years from now, 2030 will be 1,000 gigawatts. China still will dominate 80%. Today, wafer is 99%. Cell is 90%. Panel is 80%. India and the US is all moving quickly, but we still believe China is going to dominate. The one single reason I give to you today, if you want to produce 100 gigawatt solar panel, 100 gigawatt solar panel, we did our internal estimate. Starting from the mining to the quartz, to the metallurgical silicon, to the polysilicon, to the wafer, to the cell, to the panel, how many electricity you're going to use for 100 gigawatt? It's going to be 100 billion kilowatt hour for 100 gigawatt solar panel production, from mining to the panel. Can you imagine how many countries, okay, how many regions, territories could have those power to just justify it and support your manufacturing? It's not many. But in order to achieve that scale, that's the solar business. We said we need 3 things happen. Scale is number 1. That's why how China become dominant. Number 2, best of the technology. Okay, you need to have the best technology. That's why we are here. That's why we work with a lot of premium institutions. Yesterday, November 2nd, is LONGi's 22 anniversary. So we launched our new technology we call 1102, the code name 1102. Our panel efficiency is reached 22.8. Solar panel efficiency, 22.8. Cell efficiency is 25.3. That's the efficiency is not just happening in the lab. That's the efficiency we're talking about in gigawatt 10 gigawatt, 20 gigawatt manufacturing line. That's the efficiency we want. So the technology and the scale, and also when you start your supply chain, you need to subsidize, right? You need to subsidize. I think US, 12 years later, today, this year, finally figured out. That's why we passed IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. Everyone is talking about IRA program, not in this panel, but in my other panel. In this IRA, right now you have the production, the solar generation production credits. You also have solar manufacturing credits, right? For each segment, for your panel, for your cell, for your wafer, even for the polysilicon. That's subsidized. But if you look at 12 years, past 12 years, what US they do, they did anti-dumping, countervailing duty investigation, anti-circumvention, then the WRO, then June 21st this year, the Weak Forced Labor Prevention Act, which is the forced labor. So there's all this trade tariff, but regardless of supply chain interruption, the trade policy, our general geopolitical policy, but the installation-wise for the solar panel is continuing to grow. Not just in the US, in China, and globally. So if you believe that, then I think we could achieve the carbon neutral, the world. That's what we believe.
Those are impressive numbers, all right. And I agree with you about the reduction of, or the amount of energy required to do all of that. This is a hard problem, but it looks like you have the right ideas in mind. So I was going to turn the discussion to, since we're talking about the fact that these companies are operating at scale and the pace of change is quite rapid in all of these geographical areas or in these sectors. One question that obviously has been discussed a few times in general, but directly to you for your companies, is the question of capital and the question of regulation. So maybe a question to all of you: is in terms of availability of capital, is plenty available one way or another? And I'm not saying that there are subsidies or anything. Is capital a challenge for you, or it's not really a challenge because your directions are so correct? And at the same time, is regulation where you are operating, is it a help or is it a hindrance? It would be nice to understand. Shaun?
Let's tackle the difficult one first. Regulation. I've got two sides of the new energy business. One is generating the low carbon fuels, and the other is the carbon solutions. So in carbon solutions, we've got everything from offsets to CCS to carbon conversion, which is kind of more longer term. And in the regulatory environment in Australia, that is absolutely slowing down innovation in the carbon business. So CCS permits take a long time. Accounting for carbon, how what counts as a carbon credit and a carbon offset is analysed, audited, and it is, we're often in the face of the regulators saying, we want to do this and you need to count this as a carbon credit for our national contribution, to the Paris Agreement. And then, 2 years later, you get that certified. You're like, that's just too slow, right? And so pushing the regulators, and I get it, they want to get it right. And I think there was a panel earlier today about carbon accounting being fun again. I wouldn't count that as fun, but they need to innovate in that space and do that quicker. That's holding us up, regulation. The other one is permitting. I think we're talking about it, you see it in the US, we see it in Australia, trying to permit solar and wind farms. We've got Indigenous land use agreements for our First Nations people. We have to negotiate them. People a lot often don't want it in their backyard. You've got to talk to the community and have them engage, and if you don't do that correctly, you don't get your environmental permit, and these can take 18 months to 3 years. And I thought that was really bad until I spoke to Europe, and it was like 8 years, and some of them in here is like 5 to 10. So now I'm going back to Australia thinking 18 months was pretty good. But it's still, when you try and think about the amount of scale that is needed, like one of our LNG trains, just one. We've got 6 of them that export LNG to Japan. To replace it from natural gas needs 55 gigawatts of solar. 55 gigawatts. And that's a lot of solar that it needs to be installed. I can go and get some from Eric down the street there, but I'm going to have to get all that permitted and kind of build all that out. And so that to me is where the regulatory environment is tripping us up. But at the same time, we're an Australian company. We're actually really good at working our way through it, and we'll solve that challenge. We have to. We're determined to. Capital is much easier. We're a fairly large company, right? So we can fund through the valley of death. That's generally where the capital problem lies. And we'll go and partner with some of the companies that are trying, like some of these carbon conversion companies. We've made a couple of announcements on joint venturing with them, and basically providing the capital to them to go and do pilot programs. So commercial scale out of their lab. Generally, when they die through that valley of death, no, let's bridge them. And we'll provide the capital. And then when we need to get capital for larger scale, the green money is lining up out the door in order to invest in us, partly because it's showing that we're pivoting to providing those net zero solutions to everyone. The banks and the superannuation funds, the pension funds in your language, are ready to invest at scale for us. So.
All right, good to know.
Well, in the context of Greenko, they need almost $40 billion to be invested in next decade times. We are fortunate that one of the large shareholders of this company are 2 major sovereign funds. One is GIC Singapore, and second is Abu Dhabi Investment Funds. So they are well supported by them. But once you conceive a project and you build an in-house proper capability and capacity, I don't think there's any dearth of fund available for these kind of green projects, which are basically futuristic projects. The Greenko was one of the largest green bond. They came out in Asia, and they raised capital almost $4 to $5 billion through the green bond routes. And there are many investors who are looking at to provide the capital. So there is no such problem as far as capital is concerned. And what Greenko also has done is to have industry partners. And one example is that one large steel manufacturing, ArcelorMittal, have tied up with Greenko, where they will set up the upstream renewable, the part, the solar and wind. The storage will be set up by Greenko. So that kind of industry partnership have been developed. So you have one of the largest steel manufacturing in India has already tied up with them as an industry partner to invest into upstream. Then you have one of the largest aluminum processing company, Balco, by Aditya Birla Group. They have signed a partnership with Greenko. The third is the largest copper smelter of Vedanta Group. So these are the large, big industry who want to decarbonize and look at producing the green metals are coming as a partner. So this is the way another strategy which Greenko has made. And they also have now formed a joint venture with one of the largest oil and gas company in India, ONGC, to set up one full 10 gigawatt hours of storage plus renewable plus associated 1 million tons of ammonia plant. So like that, there's a partnership which is coming forward from where the capital is going to flow. So as far as capital is concerned, I don't foresee any problem. And so far, the track record has been good. And they're well supported by these 2 very important sovereign funds. Coming to the regulatory support, one difference which I have seen in the context of India, irrespective of which party government comes, it's a democracy. The agenda for decarbonization is probably has support from all the political parties, irrespective of which government comes. So this is where there's a big support, the consistency of policy. In fact, the recent government has scaled up the targets. They are more pushing for the implementation of projects, setting up the higher targets. And the biggest challenge in the context of India was of land acquisitions. And there is where government has come out and established large solar parks, where government is acquiring land and giving it to the industry and developing those parks. So this is an area where environmental clearances, land acquisition, which used to be a hindrance. I've seen my last 40 years in the oil and gas sector. This has been one of the major challenges. So this is where the government is helping hand. And what I have seen that the bureaucracy response is very good, especially in the current government. So there's a big support coming from the government. But of course, the other issue, as I said, is the supply chain, where the capacity has to be built up and where government is trying to play an enabling role and creating demands so that industry is able to invest money, create that capacity, and they're secured of their return on the investment. So I see there's a very positive environment as far as the regulatory support and the government support is concerned. And the best part is that it is a collective house, irrespective of which political party comes. So that's the biggest challenge in a democracy. When one government comes, the other government undo the previous decisions. So that's where I find a big comfort as far as the energy transition is concerned.
And from a fiscal point of view, for India, the equation is stacked in the favor of new energy. So there's reason for the government to do that, right? David?
Okay. I think it's always a problem for the capital availability for a company that is expanding its business, especially for a private company in China. Before IPO, we are a private company. The biggest stakeholder is a person, not the government. So even we can now get some investments or money from the stock market, but the capital availability is still a kind of problem for us, because sometimes we apply our loan to a bank to borrow some money, the interest will be a little bit higher than those state-owned companies. Yeah, that's kind of different. Yeah, so there are so many state-owned companies or the government-owned companies. They have the privilege to borrow the money from the bank.
Right.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of hard for us, but we're lucky because we got the IPO. If we didn't get the IPO, I think it will be much harder.
Right.
Yes. And as for the regulation, I think because the regulation in China is so strong for the government, the biggest interference from the government is that we always have to get a license, almost for everything. Because, for example, if you want to invest our waste incineration power plant, you have to get a license. If you want to build a wastewater pollution treatment factory, you need a license. If you want to invest a factory that do the battery recycling, you also need a license. So you have lots of work to do to get through the papers, and sometimes you get rejected. So we have lots of late working with the government. So we have to get a good relationship with the government. But I think someone in China just said that if you want to be a successful company, if you want to be a successful company in China, you need to have good relationship with the government, but never marry them. Yeah, that's dangerous. Yes. Yeah.
That's an easy one.
Yeah.
You don't want to get married to the government. Eric, I guess you don't have much capital problems.
I think the capital is our least concern. We are the market cap $70-80 billion. Right? We just announced that we issued a GDR, Global Depository Receipts, in the Swiss exchange. We raised $4 billion. Hopefully we can use all that money in the US for domestic manufacturing. Regulation-wise, you saw it's become less and less regulated because obvious reason solar has achieved the grid parity in most of the area. It's become the cheapest energy source, right, and the primary energy source. But we do see the challenges for the interconnections. That's why in my second track, we say we need intelligent grid storage and operator to mitigate the shortage of this PV. But we also see the development for the distributed power, right? Your home charging, storage, home optimization, and it's become one integrated piece for your solar goes to the home, goes to the business, right? So.
Okay. So I think we wanted to make some time for questions from the audience. And I see there are quite a few questions, but we have only 6 minutes left. So I'm going to pick one, which is kind of relevant for a setting like Stanford University. It's a very interesting question there. It says, what is the value of a good idea, material, or technology versus a good business strategy? Since all you guys are very strong businesses, is technology, ideas valuable to you, or is it all about business models and strategies? Yours first.
Yeah, cheat, ask the technologist on the panel. Look, I love technology. It's in my blood. I think technology is innovation, drives great business. But technology that doesn't solve a problem will really struggle. So I think for us, we've always tried to identify what are our big top 5. So when we engage with any university, any research department, the first thing we come in is, here are our top 5 problems that would make a big business impact, and not incremental, like what would fundamentally change, because then that gives you more time and kind of license to stretch the boundaries. So I'm a huge believer in technology that enables business, but at the same time make sure that the problems you're solving are going to make an impact, which when we talk about energy transition, there's no end of problems. So.
No, I agree with you. This technology is the solution. It has to provide the solution the society needs. But sometimes it's in spite of having a right idea, but the timing also has to be correct. So that's very important aspect. And a good idea and a good strategy, and the timing of the projects and implementation strategy plays a very equally important role. That doesn't mean that you undermine the technology. Of course, technology has to provide the basic solution. So it's more important is the timing and this strategy to implement the project. I think that's where I'll go.
David from Genvia and Berkeley.
I remember there was a conversation or dialogue between Elon Musk and Jack Ma from Alibaba. Yeah, I can't remember which year, but several years ago. And Musk said that it's more important for the new technology, but Jack Ma said that it's more important for the business model. That's very interesting, because I think it's both important, but in different countries, maybe it's a little bit different. I think in America, I think it's more important for the new technology. But in China or like other countries, I think maybe the business model is a little bit more important. I think, well, of course, I think both of them is very important. Because yes, you said the new technology is a solution. If you don't have the technology, you can't last very long. Yeah. Yesterday, I visited a laboratory in Stanford, which is one of my friends is there, and he introduced a lot of he's doing in the laboratory, and he is so enthusiastic with what he's doing. Then I talk about him the business model, how to expand the business, how to use the technology to face the customers. He can't understand. So why should I consider so much? Then I said that maybe we should work together. Yeah, I think it's also important. You can't work in a laboratory forever.
Right.
Yes, but if I don't get some guys in the laboratory, I think it's would be really hard for us to expand the business only for business models. Yeah.
Very good.
So idea is always good, but how you turn your idea into a good business strategy or good business model, as I said in the beginning, there's a lot of factors you need to consider. Scale, whether your technology can be right, we call manufacturability, can be mass produced, and can be cost effective. In LONGi 22 years history, we had twice we tried to deviate from solar business to get into semiconductor the business. One is in 94, second is in 2004. We tried to move our way. But eventually, after internal debate, we figured this solar PV, because it have enough growth, right? Every year, 20 to 30% combined growth. Another example I give, before we call LONGi solar technology, now we call LONGi green energy technology, because we get into hydrogen business, okay? There's a lot of people that are talking about hydrogen, but we believe our solar for hydrogen is viable, is cost effective, they have enough scale, we can ramp up, leverage our global technology leadership. That's what we get in hydrogen business. But in our 3 tracks, one in between is storage, battery, and the intelligent grid operator. We didn't get into because we don't have that gene in our company. That's why we stay away. So, but we have a lot of ideas, but we want somewhere else to turn the idea into the practice, into the strategy, into good business model. Mm-hmm. That's what you cannot do everything, right? You have to do something good which makes sense. What we call solar for solar, that's our strategy. Solar for hydrogen, that's another our strategy, we believe.
I think we are all out of time, so I'm just going to wrap it up here saying that the panelists, they actually came from New York and Beijing and Shanghai and New Delhi and from Perth all the way. We had a very good exposure into realizing that these are real solid companies which are gunning forward on the energy transition and towards decarbonization and sustainability goals. And it's quite impressive how this is progressing in Asia and on all the regions that they cover and all the wide sectors that they cover as well at the same time. I hope you'll join me in thanking them for coming here and sharing their ideas with us and getting us excited about the whole thing.